I'm Jane Callowert, and my husband and I, this is Lee, own Dragonfly Tile and Stoneworks in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. I'm one of the regional directors for the National Tile Contractors Association, and Lee is on the technical committee for the National Tile Contractors Association. We're also very involved in the artisan movement, as we call it, and have been working very closely with other people in the industry to bring back that historically important aspect of our trade. But I'm very excited to be here today to introduce our speaker. I'm going to give you a couple, they gave me a list of things that I need to cover. Just to remind you all to turn off your phones. Lee, will you turn my phone off? And also to complete the session evaluations in the mobile app. We all need your feedback. There is CEU information at the back of the room. You can see on that table, so make sure that you take advantage of that. There's a monitor that'll be, I can't think she's here right now, but she'll be back in, that can help you. You can scan your badges to confirm your attendance for CEUs, and also make sure that you get out and see all the other educational opportunities on the showroom. I will actually let you, Joshua, talk about one of those specifically, since you're going to be getting into learning design through making, and there's some very interesting visuals out on the showroom floor that I think you'll enjoy as well. So let me introduce Joshua. Joshua is from the University of Nevada, Las Vegas School of Architecture. He's a very esteemed presenter. He has a long history. I shortened a little bit of it because he's got a lot that you can talk about here. He's a tenured associate professor in the School of Architecture at the University of Nevada in Las Vegas, forging a multi-year career in the exploration, development, and execution of digital craft. His efforts in research, pedagogy, and practice belong to three primary categories: digital information as a medium, digital information as material, and digital information as a method. Prior to his appointment at UNLV, Joshua taught design studio seminars and lecture course at Ball State University's Department of Architecture. While there, through a grant from Eli Lilly Foundation, he co-founded iMade, an applied research and learning institute focused on bringing students, faculty, and design professionals with regional industry partners to work on mutually beneficial projects utilizing design, computation, and fabrication. In 2014, Joshua was invited as the Taylor Seminar lecturer at the University of Calgary's Faculty of Environmental Design. Prior to joining academe full-time, Joshua worked professionally at several architectural firms, including NBBJ's Columbus office. He has spoken worldwide and has published and presented peer-reviewed research at many media, design, architecture, and education conferences, as well as the International Journal of Architecture Computing. He has co-edited 2 books, Digital Design Exercises for Architecture Students, and Bottom-Up Social Change Symposium Proceedings. Joshua has served as a graduate coordinator and assistant director for the School of Architecture, and in 2017 received the Fielden Medal for contributions of excellence to architecture education. Joshua, thank you for being here. Let's welcome him.
Thank you. Can you guys hear me? Perfect. Thanks for the very kind introduction, Jane. You left your glasses up here.
I might need them.
There you go. Thanks again. All right, well, this is my very first Coverings, and thanks for inviting me to Coverings 2022. But I can honestly say I know over half the people in this room now. I apologize, I do have a presentation that's more formal, and I might talk at you at times, but with the small audience we have, and thank you, by the way, for coming in lunch time on day one, maybe we can maybe have a more informal discussion as well. And I will point out that these 2 tables over here, and there'll probably be a few more students that filter in over the hour, are my students. And they were busy over the last month or so designing and building and making and assembling, and then finally yesterday installing a pavilion that was all tiled, and I'll talk about that at the end. So I'm an educator at the University of Nevada, Las Vegas in the School of Architecture. I was trained and worked for a time as architect. Now I try to educate future architects. And one of the things that we try to do, and I'll just go through this. Sorry if this appears to be a little bit of an infomercial at the beginning here. I'll just skip through the CEU slides here. Is that, one of the draws that brought me to the Las Vegas was the School of Architecture here at UNLV. It's a very young school. It's just a little over 20 years old. It's very young for a School of Architecture, particularly if you look at all of our neighbors around in California, Arizona, Utah, et cetera. What really brought me here was this idea of engaging in making, right? When I first got here, and you can see I literally work right down the road. So the asterisk towards the middle of the slide is where we are right now. That's us right here in the Convention Center, Paradise and Desert Inn. The one just down the street to the south, a little over to the east, is the School of Architecture. What was fascinating about the School of Architecture when I first arrived here was just how excited everybody was around this notion of design build, right? So this idea that not only are we training folks to design and draw things, but they're also learning how to investigate things through materials. We have a full wood shop, a full metal shop. We have a bunch of CNC tools. We have a build yard. We have a lot of resources geared towards sort of critical thinking, critical use of not only designing, but making what we design to test it out, right? And so there's this sort of feedback loop between designing and making, right? You push a material and it pushes back, right? And beginning to understand that and then seeing how that begins to influence how you approach design, I think is really important. And it's something that I think a lot of architecture schools actually lack. This was one of the draws that brought me here, was this design build program that I've been, had the fortunate part of being a part of, sometimes in the middle of, and sometimes tangentially. So I'll just talk a little bit about some of the projects that the School of Architecture has done over the last few years. I've been here for, golly, almost 9 years now. Time sure does fly. My kids were tiny when we got here. And so this was the project that was just wrapping up as I arrived. Everybody was so excited about this. I arrived here in 2013, and literally every student I had at every year level had been a part of this this design build project to build a house for the desert in some capacity. Everybody was so excited about this. So this was part of the Solar Decathlon. It's a competition that's put on by the Department of Energy every few years. And so a number of schools apply to get into the competition, and then once they're accepted, there's a list of 10 to 12 schools. Then they're charged with designing, then building, then deploying a house, then measuring its performance, right? And then it's judged based on a set of criteria on like how much, let's see, it's water consumption, how much energy it generates, how much energy it consumes, et cetera, right? There's a whole list of measures dealing with this. So this was our very first foray into design build in 2013. It's called Desert Sol, Sol meaning the sun, of course. And I'll just pass you on to a video here that explains the project. But ultimately, it was our very first time at the Solar Decathlon. We came in second place overall, which was outstanding. I mean, the Swiss beat us, Team Switzerland, but we clobbered USC and all those other fancy schools from the United States, which is a big deal for us. I'll just go ahead and play this video really quickly to help explain. And you can go visit this house even today. It's at the Springs Preserve. I'll show you where that is in just a moment.
I know. It's called Outdoor Nevada, and we're outdoors all the time. But here at the Springs Preserve, just outside of Las Vegas, outdoors and indoors combine to make one very smart house. Come on, let's take a look. Sometimes preserving the outdoors starts indoors. That's the case with a very smart house built by very smart students. This is Aaron McAuliffe, and he is the curator of exhibits here. And Aaron, tell me about this fascinating structure.
Sure. In 2013, University of Nevada, Las Vegas competed in the U.S. Department of Energy's Solar Decathlon competition. It's a competition that the federal government has every other year that invites schools from around the world to create a home that is very sustainable, in this case off the grid or using solar energy, one that's very, very marketable and desirable to consumers.
So we're not talking about just a few solar panels. I mean, they really thought this through.
They really did. Everything is off the grid. So for example, the home itself produces energy by solar panels on the roof. It has a series of other panels that take the energy from the sun to warm water that could be used for the radiant floor heating for the winter time to keep you warm, and they're also for the washing and the laundering that you would need to do in a home.
Okay, I got to see this. Will you show me around?
Sure,
Oh,
no
this
problem.
is the coolest. Let's go. More than 60 UNLV students, 20 faculty, and industry consultants designed this home. Students served as general contractors, framers, and engineers. Let's start with the outside. Tell me about that.
Sure, the exterior of the home is made from reclaimed snow fence, so basically fence that was used along the side of the road to catch snow drifts. Over time, the rancher might need to replace that, so it was basically left over for that purpose and recut for the purposes of this home and put on the exterior.
How long did it take them to design and build the house?
At least a couple years. And then after the competition, we probably looked at about 6 months or so to prepare it to be permanently installed here at the Springs Preserve.
Wow, this is really stylish. This wasn't really what I was expecting at all from the outside. This is amazing.
Yeah, it's a really contemporary home. They did a really nice job of using the kind of interiors that I think a lot of people prefer in their homes today. And they also use a combination of other less traditional items. So for example, the kitchen table there is also made from the same materials as the reclaimed snow fence. It was just a little bit left over, and the benches from the snow fence, the table as well.
The kitchen almost has a Jetsons feel, or a futuristic yet retro feel at the same time.
Yeah, it's very, very contemporary. It's the kind of home that you might see maybe in a mid-century modern home that was designed in the 1950s and 60s here in the desert Southwest.
Approximately 40% of the energy consumed in the U.S. goes to powering commercial buildings and homes. This 750 square foot home serves as a display to change the way we see and utilize our resources. What would be the purpose of owning a home if this were mass produced like this? Your bills are lower, less use on the environment?
Absolutely. And in fact, UNLV created this home as a home that could be marketed towards people looking for a second home. Personally, for me, it's large enough for a primary home for my needs. But for someone who might want a second home, they basically created it in such a way with the idea that you can move it to wherever you are in the desert Southwest. So to that end, the home itself is built on 2 chassis. So I like to think of it as an early form of a mobile home. And then right in the middle of the home, just right by the bathroom, the 2 chassis are joined. And then after the home is moved, the decking is put on, the window boxes are put on, and we have the home that we're in today.
Desert Soul works as a prototype, completely off the grid, which means it doesn't depend on any public utilities.
I think we are looking at the future with mass-produced homes, particularly the homes that could have a very basic platform and then are customized by an individual homeowner. If you were to go to a mobile home supplier, you would get the basic home, and of course you're adding on all the various different options. Same idea here. This home doesn't look like your typical mobile home, but there's also a movement to take old shipping containers and turn those into custom contemporary homes, and those are very, very exciting as well.
Does it come with a mailbox?
No, but I'm sure if you were to purchase a home, you could probably talk the builder into making you a mailbox.
Do they have a price if this was to be produced, what this house would go for?
Sure. As far as I know, UNLV is still running the numbers on that. Last I heard, they felt that this home could fit in the maybe $300,000, $350,000 price point, but that's this particular home, which is the prototype. So as you start mass producing them, the prices will start to plummet.
Tell me about the windows and their design and purpose.
Sure. Basically, the windows are all dual pane windows, which is something that I hope everybody has at home anyway. A dual pane window is going to keep the heat inside during the cold months and the cold inside during the hot months.
Obviously, if you move the house somewhere, water is going to be an issue depending on where you go. The sun, however, is available to everyone, right? And that's one of the benefits of having this home.
That's correct. So you could basically have this home create your own energy with certain modifications to be self-sufficient. Other ways that you can hook it up to the grid and feed into the grid and perhaps make some money back.
Super cool. Let's look at the rest. I want to see the bedroom.
Sure.
Solar energy is the only fuel source. The house also features low-flow fixtures and an outdoor deck screen that filters the sun in the summer. I hope we're looking at the future because this just has a feeling like we're going in the right direction. This is good for the environment. It's certainly good for the pocketbook. So, Aaron, thank you so much for letting me peek down the road and see what things might be like in the future a little bit in housing. Thank you so much.
And you're welcome. Thanks for coming out today.
Desert Soul was designed to be an extension of the Mojave Desert, and it represents a new way of how mankind interacts with its own environment. It's nature and science combined for a better and more sustainable future. Who knows what the future holds, but thanks to some really smart students at UNLV, we just might have a say-so in how we interact with the environment.
Here we go. All right, so you can actually visit that house if you're interested. It's in that topmost asterisk there, just off the 95 freeway at the Springs Preserve. So there's actually a park called the Springs Preserve. We actually have springs and natural springs and a water table under Las Vegas Valley, at least the central part. It's what brought the old Spanish Trail, the Mormon Trail, the railroads to stop in the valley here, was a source of water. And so, you know, as time went on, we began to try to build up this culture of making and building. Here's another design build project, this time up in Reno, at Lake Tahoe, or up in the Reno region. The box office for the Shakespeare Festival that's up at Lake Tahoe. And again, I'll just quickly, this is a shorter video, but this one I think is a little more relevant, and it talks to some faculty and students about what they learned.
We're designing and building the building here at UNLV. The building will then be placed on a truck and transported to the site at Lake Tahoe. The reason we're doing that is it gives our students the opportunity to take their regular classes, but also to engage in building the projects that they've designed.
We normally don't think about, is it possible? How is it done? How are people going to actually do this? When you're actually building, you realize, okay, this needs to go first, is this possible, what materials can be used for? So it makes the designing process a lot more realistic. It's very different just seeing the theoretical work and actually doing it. You learn a lot more.
Oh, okay, and so if you take 95 further up, all the way to Reno, you can actually go visit that one. We've done an artist retreat, a sort of duplex, right outside of Zion National Park in Springdale, Utah. Again, I have a video. I don't have that many videos, sorry, but there we go. Maybe I'll go ahead and narrate this one. We won't have to watch the whole thing, but you can see that you know, it's meant for sort of 2 dwellings and workspaces for artists. Out in this incredibly gorgeous landscape. If anybody has been to Zion, you know, right outside the gates, it's absolutely stunning. While they're close in proximity, they're actually facing different ways, and you know, without using fencing and things like that, just the way these things are situated and the way they're massed, the way walls are placed, that gives each person dwelling there a little bit of privacy. So you can see it's very much a linear scheme for each of these living spaces. So essentially, at the ends, they're framing particular views. Right, so. This is just a virtual walkthrough, I guess. I'm actually going to speed this up. I think you guys get the gist of it. And so if you take the I-15 all the way up to St. George and then go off to Zion, you could see that one as well. But you know, the gist of this is that we do a lot of things where we, at different scales and different complexities, we try to make what we draw, and then we draw what we can make, right? This was our latest Solar Decathlon entry, Mojave Bloom. And again, we placed in the top 3. We were at 3rd place overall. So back in the winner's circle. I'll just play one more video for you explaining some of these.
With over 200,000
I apologize for all these
veterans living in
videos,
the
but I
Nevada,
feel like the
Team
context
Las
is
Vegas'
important
home,
to sort of explain.
Mojave Bloom, is designed for the returning veteran with post-traumatic stress disorder, a traumatic brain injury, or both. The building is proposed to be located beside an existing sanctuary of healing, the Las Vegas Community Healing Garden. Mojave Bloom creates an environment that gives the occupant a chance to habilitate, transition back into society, and therefore bloom. Like a desert flower, the house beautifies its surroundings while remaining entirely energy self-sufficient. Mojave Bloom provides a healing oasis in the middle of the harsh Mojave Desert through a calculated polyphony of sensory experiences. Drawing inspiration from the traditional Islamic sawn, or courtyard, this house turns inward, sheltering the resident from heat and noise, and achieving a model of alfresco living otherwise unattainable in the southern Nevada climate. The building is wrapped with highly sophisticated, airtight materials and insulation to prevent wasteful energy loss. By selectively choosing native foliage, Mojave Bloom features plants that require minimal watering and can thrive in the desert environment while providing a calm and healing atmosphere. An adjustable solar thermal collector heats water for domestic hot water use and radiant heating for interior spaces. Our bifacial solar panels with adjustable racking tilt to the ideal angle for different seasons or locations. 2 batteries are used for backup power and peak power reduction. Our phase change material plenum heats or cools incoming fresh air while filtering out toxins without using electricity. For dehumidification and secondary heating, the house uses efficient Mitsubishi electric mini-split heat pumps, which are equipped with anti-allergy enzymes to help improve indoor air quality. In recent years, extreme weather conditions such as drought have impacted our city's crops and livability. Our building recycles water from the shower, laundry, and irrigation lines for toilet flushing and re-irrigation. Scuppers are used to collect rainwater, which is then channeled to a gray water tank. Fresh and black water is also collected and stored. Mojave Bloom incorporates a living green wall that cools the dry desert air via evaporative transpiration and provides a visual, auditory, and olfactory stimulation and distraction to help with irritability. Designed as a sanctuary for healing, Mojave Bloom's intricate mechanical systems and the efficiency of the building's enclosure provides comfort while lighting, sound, and air are used to stimulate cognitive well-being. The ability to manipulate space allows the resident to shift their home to meet their needs, adapting to the weather conditions of the Las Vegas Valley, their social activities, and their personal needs for connection or refuge while healing from trauma. With over 200...
Okay, and that's actually been redeployed, the sort of central asterisk there, just on the way to our downtown on Charleston Boulevard. There's a healing garden that was started for those affected by the October 1st mass shooting. And so that's been deployed in that healing garden as part of the park. All of these are riding flying distance to see if you're interested. And then I should say, this isn't the first foray that UNLV has had with coverings. In 2014, just as I arrived here, a colleague of mine was doing something similar. So Coverings was in Las Vegas. This is the last time Coverings was in Las Vegas, 2014. And they did a series of benches and seating prototypes, all fully tiled. You can see some of the examples here, right? So some very minimal, elegant, sleek, playing around with mosaics versus what to do with all those grout joints. Ripping them down, trying to sort of wrap curves and with them. Got to watch where you sit on this one. Don't want to sit on that barrel cactus or too close anyway. Don't know what this one was. It's interesting. All right, and so again, thanks for bearing with me, but I just wanted to sort of provide some context on some of the things that we do in our School of Architecture. Over the last 7 or 8 years I've been there, related to, again, trying to explore design not just through the pencil and paper or the computer and the mouse, but also with materials and tools, getting our hands dirty, being hands-on. And so this is the way the course that I taught this spring was sort of marketed to our students. Of course, it had the generic title, Special Topics in Architecture, because it was just an elective course. I superimposed a design, build, furniture program onto it. But it was this opportunity to learn through making, and through shaping, engaging materials, designing and building, in this case, furniture prototypes, so thinking about seating, using tile, right? So, you know, back in August, Lena and some of the folks from the industry approached me, and we had breakfast together just down the street at the Mirage, in fact, talking about just this, right? When it could happen, and how would we make this stuff sort of happen? And the idea was to maybe go a little beyond just doing some benches, but to actually make a pavilion. So the question became, how do we make a more cohesive space? How do we make everything sort of talk to each other and have a sort of common interface? I won't show you the original ideas that I modeled up and showed them. They were very naive, and they let me know they were very naive at the time. But I would plead ignorance of you know, how to lay tile at the time. But thinking about like a material system like tile and how we work with it, and thinking about it as a constraint and generator of how we design. I think that's really important. And I think it's easier said than done, right? I think it was actually maybe in the second half of our course where the students actually got to get their hands dirty and actually like start to play around with materials, make stuff, have mistakes, and learn, right? But in other words, this idea of learning by doing is what we try to facilitate. And so that's sort of how we approached it. And then this idea that, you know, at the very end, we get to deploy it all at the convention center. 20,000, 30,000 people get to sit on it, tell us what they like about it, what they don't like about it, but nevertheless see it, get displayed. All of these sort of tangible things, right? So not just a bunch of drawings or computer-generated renderings, but actual physical furniture. And it has to work, and it has to, you know, can't fall over and it can't fall apart. Right? And so that boiled down into a set of objectives and outcomes. So right away we were like, you know, none of us who are coming at this for the first time are going to become expert craftspeople, especially in tile, right? We're going to scrape the surface, and we're going to try our best, and we're going to learn from some of the best, and we're going to put a quality product out there. But really what we want to do is we want to learn from and collaborate with industry professionals. We want to network. We want to be able to have intelligent conversations with people who do make things with their hands, right? I think that's really important. Empathy, right? You know, architects aren't usually taught in school how to listen, and yet I think by engaging folks from all around the building industry, you know, we're forced to listen, right? We're forced to engage in a way that we that's not just top down, just sort of handing off a set of drawings and saying, please make this, right? Managing time, these sort of soft skills, developing leadership skills, working within teams, right? Being responsible, right? Accomplishing a set of tasks and ultimately producing some sort of tangible physical outcome. Better understanding that relationship then with how that empathy and some of those listening to try to better understand that sort of production process can help inform design at the very beginning, right? It's really easy. If I'm building a bridge from this direction and someone else is building a bridge from this direction, it's not helpful unless they meet in the middle, right? And so that's sort of what we're trying to accomplish here, is to sort of produce professional architects that are willing to go that extra mile, right? To have those conversations so that things can actually meet and align better. Learn and practice some practical skills, right? And we did a lot of those, especially at the last 2 or 3 weeks, didn't we? And then prototype our ideas, work out detailing. You know, again, going back and forth between a drawing, but then also prototyping, I think, is really important. Testing things out. Making messes, making mistakes. It's one way to learn. It certainly is. It's a very effective way of learning. Not being afraid of failure, but trying, right? Oftentimes I found people freeze up and they sort of try to stare things to death, trying to work it out in their head. And sometimes you just need to just try. You'll learn a lot more by figuring out how not to do it before you figure out how to do it. And so these were the expectations put in front of them, this sort of a model of experiential learning, right? Where you have an experience, you reflect on that experience, you go back and reconceptualize, and then you try again, right? This sort of iterative cyclical model that we usually utilize for design, but I would argue the more you actually try to make and prototype things, the more cycles you go through, right? The important part, and probably the hardest, is reflect, right? There's always a really hard challenge from a professor standpoint to sort of get your students to work out of the moment for a moment, get their heads out of the trenches, so to say, and really sort of think critically about what they've done, right, before they move ahead again, right? But this idea of, again, coaching them, you know, you're going to fail, right? Don't be afraid to fail, right? The question is, what are you going to learn, okay? How does that help you move forward, right? Develop critical thinking skills and problem-solving skills, actively engaged, not only in learning. And a lot of this is, I can't really tell them everything to do, right? I mean, 28 students is a lot. I think 3 drops, so we're down to 25, right? 25 students is a lot of students to try to, you know, the saying is herding cats, right? And it really is, in a way. Right? Everybody is smart. Everybody has their own goals, right? And then they're within teams, and those teams have their own goals. And so, you know, you can only scaffold a certain amount, and that's always the balancing act when you're trying experiential learning, is how much do you scaffold and how much do you leave open-ended, right? And then at the end, how do you, again, build in those sort of reflection points so that people can move on and move forward in a productive way? It's almost like knowing which direction is moving forward versus backwards, right? It really does take a set of reflection to do that. And so on. So there were a lot of expectations and a lot of outside work, but this idea of learning by doing, having to collaborate with others, learning a bunch of new skills, it was a really steep learning curve, right? The first time you try to trowel, thin set on this substrate, and you know, all that sort of stuff that we all learned for the first time, and then did over and over and over again. It makes you really, I think, appreciate those who are really skilled at the craft, right? We only scratch the surface, and we'll be very blunt and honest about that. And I think a lot of you who might be more experienced with these things can quickly sort of spot some of the mistakes and errors, or maybe work through the process really quickly about, well, what decisions were they making, and you know, and so you know, that was all a lot of new stuff for us, right? Really steep learning curve in a really quick amount of time. Communication is actually stunningly difficult. We all can text and we all can email, right? But just getting everybody engaged and present and invested, like up here, in what they're doing, and getting everybody on the same page moving forward can be a real challenge, right? And even more so when money isn't involved, but just, you know, this idea, and you'll see some examples when I go through some of the photos and some of the process of what we produced out for the Coverings Lounge this year. You'll see some examples where that did happen, right? With a lot of help from some others, and getting like, let's say, a team of 4, like moving as a team, as a brigade, really in a productive way. And so that's something I was really proud to see at the end, is that, you know, at these key times, people did come together and produce and execute in a way that I thought was really productive. Right, so I'll just talk about these for a minute. You will get feedback and critique. That was right up front, right? You're not just going to be told that everything's really great, right? But you will get feedback, and you will have to revise. You will have to sort of rethink some things from time to time. And again, that all boils down to really listening, right? All right, so again, time expectations. You know, this was just a 3-credit-hour course, so we met for 3 hours per week formally. That all happened in the same morning, the same day at 8:30 in the morning, which was not ideal. I would actually, if I ever taught this again, I would say we need to break that up and have maybe an hour and a half twice a week or something like that. And so, you know, 6 to 9 hours of outside work per week at least, right? Being managers of their own time, delegating tasks. Again, this is all stuff that, if you've never done this before, it's pretty difficult, honestly. It's, again, those are those soft skills of, you know, that's where you start to see leaders pop up, sort of delegating and sort of thinking a couple of steps ahead, and making sure that everybody else is being productive and being helpful. And then, of course, trying to figure out how to get 25 people into a shop that, you know, opening up garage door bays, making sure we have adequate ventilation. We started this in late January, early February, and so there was still a lot of concern about the pandemic. Social distancing, we started with masks. They were still mandated when we started the semester. Safety protocols as well. There's a lot of safety measures, of course. We're dealing with saws. We're dealing with all kinds of power equipment. So getting everybody trained and up to speed with that kind of stuff, wearing the right PPE, et cetera. And this was more or less our calendar. So this right here maybe sort of underscores how difficult it is to do something with an industry that is so helpful, but moves at a much faster pace than, let's say, a university. Universities are still largely run on a model that was developed in medieval times, right? They don't change fast. Things do not move fast. It takes me 3 months to going through the procurement process just to buy something, right? And so, you know, and then our deadline is in the first week of April, and we still have like a whole another month of the semester left, right? And so it's like, hurry up and let's go, and let's pause while we wait for, you know, the substrate to be delivered or things like that. It was very much a lot of work, right? Just sort of keeping everything going and trying to keep it in a sequence and order that made sense. We had a number of folks visit us from time to time. There was one point in time where I think we had folks from the industry, Elena and Kathy, come, and at the same time we had the other half of the class go to the showroom to sort of start to survey the kind of tile that they were thinking about. We had wonderful industry partners. They were the absolute best, and I'll have a list of them at the end. I don't want to leave anybody out, but I'll just say that if we needed anything, we just asked for it, and they got it to us as quickly as they could. It was absolutely amazing. Not everybody in the building industry is like that, believe me. I've never seen an industry as responsive and caring and generous as the tile industry. Absolutely fantastic. We had folks in and out. We had Mark Heinlein from the National Tile Contractors Association in a few times. Mike DeMello from MAPE came as well. So we had a series of training workshops and sort of help workshops from time to time. You know, the delays came from sort of trying to manage what we were trying to design and what kind of materials we need, right? And so eventually, you know, we got caught back up. But, you know, it's really easy to fall behind if you're not thinking a few steps ahead and trying to sort of keep things going. And there's nothing worse than when you go to class and 25 people standing around going, what do we do now? Right? Last but not least, I will call out, I don't think Mark could make it today. He's probably on a stage somewhere giving another demonstration. He's absolutely fantastic. And instead of just coming for 2 days at the end of March, he came for an entire week plus, right? So he spent literally 8-9 straight days with us here in Las Vegas, helping us sort of understand and keeping us all busy. He didn't do all the work for us. It'd be impossible, right? But he was there to sort of keep us going. Every day prior to that, we would run into the next step. We'd be like, well, how do we do this? How do we do that? And we'd have to go back and forth trying to ask folks that actually know what they're doing, right? With him there, it became much smoother. It became much, much smoother. And then yesterday, all of our stuff that were on pallets were picked up by a big truck, driven down the street to the convention center here, and we deployed it in the lounge. This was the site that we were given. So, you know, typically in architecture school, we look at the site, and we do this sort of analysis, and we look at all the sort of environmental conditions, cultural conditions, codes, zoning, and all that sort of stuff. Here, much different, you know, trying to figure out what the constraints are to help us out. But we were given this sort of upper square, 20 by 20 square, as a part of the coverings lounge. And so the idea when we started was to make this sort of serpentine partition. And that became a site for 4 different sort of seating bench options that you can see on either side at either end, right? So it's sort of a dumbbell configuration. And then we had 2 sort of blank corners, and so we decided that we could have 4 more sites, 2 on each corner. And those 2 adjacent to each other could respond to each other and sort of work out some synergy. So, you know, we went through a few twists and turns along the way. We started with 28 students. So the idea was to break it up into 8 teams of 3 plus 1 team of 4. 4 folks working on the serpentine partition, and then we'd have sort of 8 teams working each on their own seating or bench prototype. We lost 1 team right after the first day. They dropped. And so then we were down to 7 teams. Eventually, the 7th team had some issues, so we moved the 7th team over to the serpentine team. Right? But this was basically the format that we were starting with, right? How do we start to manage students and break them up and give them discrete tasks so that they can be productive? And then talking about in this case, VD gave us a bunch of substrate. The foam core with the cement liner. But thinking about it as a kit of parts. And so what we did is we start off with similarly scaled material, corrugated cardboard, similar scale. I'm sort of thinking about, well, if each of those correspond to a sheet, then how can we start to make things with as few cuts as possible? Or if we start to make things, how do we nest the parts into a full sheet again, right? And try to maximize yield, minimize waste, et cetera, right? You can see some of their very first, you guys are probably laughing, this was a long time ago, it seems like, right? All of these cardboard models that they brought one day, like on week 2 or something like that. It was like after the first day. You can see a sort of motley mixed match of stuff and shapes. And you can actually see, or you might see some hexagons and some tiers and risers and things like that actually they made it through the gauntlet and were executed. Interesting what ideas fall to the wayside and what moves on. We came at this kind of with some ideas on how to kerf cut, sheet material to make it bend and curl, and how to reinforce things with webbing and things like that on the inside. A lot of us have done some sort of wood framing, and so it's sort of understanding how typical wall cavities work, then trying to translate that into VD substrate. But I show this only because it's interesting to compare it to how we actually made it. So I'll just go through some of the visuals in a very linear way, unfortunately, because this semester's been anything but linear. But sort of showing how they progressed with their design, then I'll show you how they progressed through fabricating and making the results. So this is some of the initial drawings of the serpentine wall. And then starting to look at the elevations, trying to sort of negotiate, lines of tile that they saw at Arizona Tile Showroom down the street with the geometry and trying to understand the module of tiles. It took us actually a little while although we suspected this at the time, that, nominal size and actual size, they vary and they're different. And so, we started off with assumptions like 48 inches, 4-inch modules, those sorts of things. Working with masonry a lot, we sort of understand a unit being offset for mortar joints and things like that. So getting the grout joints weren't that difficult for us, but certainly understanding how things nest into a tile that says 24, but is 23 and 3/4 wide by 36.5 or something like that. And then how do you saw it, and what kind of saw blade thickness do you have to account for every time you make a cut, et cetera, right? Became this sort of game back and forth between how we draw it and how we make it. This was another team, and this remained largely intact. You can see that they have some blue tile with white grout joints and some white tile with blue grout joints, basically. Sort of flip it. Their initial making some shapes, thinking about how this could be occupied by multiple people in different ways. Maybe it's a lounger for someone, maybe it's a place for 3 people to sit, maybe it varies between, let's say, someone a child size versus adult size, etc. And then thinking about how those shapes break down into surfaces, how those surfaces break down into pieces, how those pieces could be nested into, let's say, a 48 by 60 inch VD board or something like that. Another one that you'll notice out there, right? Here are the sort of computer renderings of it. Actually, frighteningly close to the final result, minus the grout joints. I don't know what happened there, but here you can see them trying to sort of figure out different ways to make corners. You know, how do you make a corner like this? How do you make a corner like that? What do you want people to see? How do you want people to see it? How do you want it to feel, right? With furniture especially, it has to be very tactile, and so you have to really think about those. And then trying to figure out how to tessellate the tile across. Where do you put grout joints? Where does it make the most sense? How do you minimize the amount of sawing you have to do, or the amount of offcuts that are just pure waste? You try to minimize waste and maximize yield. Team Hexagon, a set of hexagons that are extruded with a planter. Right. What's interesting is that they found these hexagon tiles, and then everything is based off of that module. So it's actually a really smart move that they made very quickly in sort of identifying what was going to drive the project and the size and the scale of things. And so sort of really, I think, successfully negotiating the material and the module with the overall form and seating, really, really smart. But even then, I don't think they necessarily anticipated having to trim things up with Schluter tracking and those sort of things, like trying to figure out how to turn corners from a, let's say, a 60-degree angle or a 120-degree angle versus a 90-degree angle, those sorts of things. They had to be worked out, and they were very methodical in actually working that out. It was really good to see. Another example of sort of making these sort of seats that could be, you know, places to step, places to sit, places to recline. And then how do you begin to deploy, in this case, subway tile across it in different patterns and configurations. This one evolved the most. I'm really proud of it because every time they sort of went back to the drawing board, it got better and better and better and smarter. And I'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. But needless to say, you know, on top of just designing stuff, we did a lot of workshops. This is our very first one. There's Mark Heinlein down at the bottom left. All of our students, you can see we started out with a lot of students, 25 students. The gentleman right behind me on the right with the hat is Paul Morrison. He's my colleague. He runs a lot of the shops at the school, and he was so invaluable. We would not have gotten anywhere without him. My name is on the class because of the instructor, but he was just as much the instructor as I was. So we were meeting in the classroom with some of these folks, as well as doing practical demonstrations. You know, how to install tile, right? How to trowel, then set. You guys probably looking at this and thinking, man, that seems so long ago. There's Mike DeMello from MAPE also giving us a lot of information in a short amount of time, and then doing basically a grouting workshop with us, so learning how to grout for the first time. I will say we actually had more females than males in the class, which I'm really proud of. Then development, right? So starting to learn about the process, getting our hands dirty, trying to turn that into, okay, how do we take a really simple picture and make it into something that's actually real? Really difficult. So here's just the elevations of, let's say, the serpentine wall, sort of thinking about it as a set of panels, straight sections and curved sections and ends and faces and things like that, and tops, and trying to break it down into not only a sort of coloration with gradient from dark to light, also adding some highlights, but also thinking about the density of grout joints and pieces and how those work, all while working off of a 1 7/8, 3 7/8, 5 7/8 inch module. So it took a lot of just ripping tile down into strips of certain widths and then cross-sawing it into specific shapes. So all of these tiles, all the tiles you see here in this elevation were probably sawn at least 3 times, and oftentimes 4, which I don't recommend doing in hindsight, but we did it anyway. And so you can see that basically when you have over 1,500 unique pieces, you have to be really clever in trying to manage that stuff, right? You have to label each piece and know exactly where each piece of the jigsaw puzzle goes, right? You get one thing out of order and the whole thing screws up. And so managing this stuff, getting it nested, making sure that we have enough tile quantity, sort of being able to tell the let's say Arizona Tile in this case, how much tile we need of each product became really important. We even then started to break it down, and I don't know if you can see this very well, the lines aren't showing up very well, my apologies, but along the top are a set of, let's say in this case, 12 by 24 tiles, and then sort of breaking it up into the number of strips we need so that the person at one saw can just say, okay, I need 8 strips of 1 7/8, I need 4 strips of 3 7/8, and just start ripping things. And then somebody else at a different saw can start to cross-cut and into the final shapes, and trying to, again, think about how to get rid of waste, which was, we still had some waste, but we tried to minimize it as much as possible. There's nothing worse than filling up a landfill with a bunch of stuff that you paid for, right? So, and then finally getting around to making. So again, starting off with those shapes and making a bunch of weird shapes out of this VD substrate, sawing things, cutting things, and then gluing things. And started to rough out all of these shapes. Really interesting, it's like you try to compensate for, being maybe a 1/16 of an inch off in the maybe cutting in some cases. But then if you haven't done this before, it's like, what's the thickness of the tile? What's the thickness of the thin set underneath? And all that stuff starts to add up. And so a lot of the assumptions we made at the very beginning, we had to rethink, right, as we went. You could start to see, those are hexagon shapes. We could start to see some benches emerge. And at the same time, this was Dylan, one of our students, cutting tile down over spring break. Dylan and Paul and some of the other folks spent our entire spring break just sort of making things, getting these things ready. Here's Edward, poor Edward, looking at the sort of drawing and trying to figure out all these labeled pieces, trying to lay them out, right? Sort of putting the puzzle together for the first time, right? And here we go, more VD shape making, trying to figure out what's square. Starting to see all these benches emerge, at least the shapes, right? Without the skin, without the tile. Some of these things starting to take shape. And honestly, a really full shop when there's 25 people in there, plus in this case it's a woodworking shop, so there's planers and joiners and saws and band saws and table saws, right? So staging things and trying to stay out of each other's way, trying to think a few steps ahead. Where do you make something? Is there enough space around it? How do we get it out of one of the garage door bays? How to not block one of the garage door bays? All became a series of logistics that we had to sort of fold into trying to also make the stuff we're trying to make, right? So I'm guessing everybody has these logistics they have to work around. Even worse when you're on a job site than maybe in a factory or in a wood shop facility, right? But something that we got a little bit of a taste of, even in our own shop on campus there. Again, our jobs as instructors were just to sort of, try to make sure everybody's staying productive and that people are moving forward. And starting to see all of these things emerge, right? The shapes start to you start to lay out tile on them. You start to try to figure out how this stuff works. All those mosaics, custom mosaics that we made, we started taping them up, spacing them, etc. How do you set these things out? This team actually had really, really clever grand scheme of like making everything to conform to the exact module of the tile. Of course, that didn't work. It probably rarely does unless you have like really good hand sewing skills after the fact. And so again, Mark just sort of showing them, okay, well, here's what we can do, right? Do we start with the sides? Do we start with the top? How do we lay things out? How do we find center lines, et cetera, right? And going with those standards. NTCA is really, really standards-based, and so he really hammered that home with us in a good way, really positive way. Here we are trying to figure out what to do with all of this tile. This team, they beveled or mitered all of their corners around their edges. So this team got so good at doing these back miters on these saws. It was absolutely fascinating to watch how scared they were on day one trying it. They really were. They aren't here, unfortunately. I don't think they could make it. I think they're probably in class right now. With how good they were by the end of just sort of, each of them knew, they knew what each other was thinking, right? Before actually having to say anything out loud. So they were actually working really well as a team. And again, these are kind of in a weird order, but just sort of showing you how things progressed in a, teams would work ahead, and then, they would have to go to class, and another team would move ahead. Sort of getting all this tile in, trying to figure out what to do with it, making sure that we have the right measurements. Multiple teams working at once, and how do we solve the issue of space, and how many people can use a saw at once, and et cetera. QEP would like that image on the left with all their spacers in it. There's Dylan with Mark, sort of taping all these things up. And there we are in the middle of installing some of these mosaics onto the substrate. Excuse me. And then leaving ourselves a little bit of room at the bottom, so there wasn't going to be any trimming. We just sort of pieced them in by measuring and finishing them up, taping them on. This team was interesting. They decided to take this black tile and smash it into pieces and then piece it together and then grout the in-between. I was really skeptical at first. I was like, that's a lot of tile. It's really expensive. Why are you smashing it? Don't do that. And I was really skeptical of them being able to pull it off, but they actually did. And I think they picked a really nice sort of grout to work with it. It's really contrasted, sort of rose gold to go contrast with the black. Trying to make all their grout joints line up, even as three-dimensionally the bench pushes and pulls and has some cantilevers to it. Here we see those black and white subway tiles starting to get covered. Here we see that computer rendering starting to look a lot more real. Hexagons getting made. Serpentine walls getting grouted in this case. So this was, again, Mark, I can't stress this enough, but once we had teams there fully, right, we get them going. So this was them working as a brigade. So we had, let's say Dylan sort of troweling in or floating in all that grout, somebody going in, working all those joints, and then somebody else going in with the buckets trying to sort of wipe everything away. And so, coming in with somebody that does this for a living, you'd say, well, yeah, that's how you would do it. It's not obvious to somebody who doesn't do this for a living and is only doing it for the very first time. But getting them to work as a team, getting them to sort of understand what's going on, to be physically and intellectually engaged and invested in it enough to sort of work it through became really important. There's a serpentine wall going together for the very first time after all the tiles were set. And that's what the digital and the physical, we weren't too far off, were we? That's not so bad. We made a lot of, we realized we didn't need as much VD as we thought. We made the tops removable so we can get into the cavities and start to bolt things together. Paul was great because he made these sort of bearing plate, sort of extra washers. They're just basically plywood plates to sort of keep everything together and make sure that we don't over tighten or pull bolts through the VD, the foam substrate. All right, here we go with some time-lapse video. I just thought I'd throw some of these in since everybody loves to watch people moving around really fast like maniacs. But you can see, you know, Mark and Mike DeMello from MAPE, they both came. They were both hands-on. They both worked with us. They had their knee pads on, and they were right there on the floor with us, or right there working on the tables with us. Right. Sort of getting those dudes on. Look at that. That was like last week, but it felt like 6 months ago or something. Right, so again, you can see it's like mass chaos, herding cats, right? All of these people in the shop all at once, all trying to be productive. I think that was the side they started out on. Now they're doing it themselves. Don't worry, it's not like 6 more hours of this, so we'll wrap up pretty quick. I'll move on. And then simply as they got done, you know, moving on the pallets, this is our build yard outside of the shop. So you can see inside one of those garage door bays, that pink wall is the sink wall in one of our shops. And here they are outside next to all the air chillers and blowers. You know, getting ready, just staged for, you know, we actually completed this 2 days before what they needed to be done. So we were just waiting around for Freeman's truck to show up and take them away, which happened yesterday morning. There was the truck. I opened the gates. We blocked off some parking spaces so they could have a chance at sort of straightening up and backing in. There they are, putting them on the truck. There they are, strapping them to the walls. We didn't have any casualties, no missing teeth, no cracked grout joints. Everything traveled just fine, which I was actually really surprised about. I mean, that orange toolbox there on the picture is, you know, it has all kinds of stuff in case, for contingencies, in case we had to start to fix some things there on the showroom floor. But fortunately, we didn't need most of it. Here we are starting the install, getting that stuff ready. Here's one more time lapse of yesterday getting to the install. There we go, all those pieces. Boop, 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 boop. Elena. Never fails. I set up a camera and everybody walks in front of it. And so as this goes on, this is just a few more seconds of this. I will mention that on Thursday, there's a reception at the Coverings Lounge, and we'd certainly welcome you guys, invite you to come and let us know what you think. The good, the bad, and the ugly. You know, it's the first time making stuff out of tile. We'd welcome all of your comments. That's how we learn, right? Just going back to that syllabus item, we will get critiqued. We will be told what we did good and what we didn't do good, what was more and less successful. And so with that, I sort of open it up to any discussion or questions. And I would certainly ask the students who are here to stand up if you're around. Stand up, students that are here. Yeah, so yeah. You get my applause as well. Our sponsors, we got some saws from IQ and from saws and some equipment from QEP, MAPE, Schluter, Vidi, Arizona Tile, kicked in about $4,000 worth of tile to us. So they'll be there too to help celebrate with us. Really successful collaboration. And you know, again, this is the slide I always leave off on. If you ever want to get a hold of me, here's how. Paul's not here, he's my colleague, but that's his email address as well if you ever want to shoot him a note and ask him a question, or you're in town. Please don't hesitate to contact us. We're in the city of the hospitality universe of hospitality capital of the universe. I've said that so many times I can't even say it straight. So whenever you're in town, just drop us a line. We'll give you a tour. We'll take you to one of those silly decathlon houses or something, right? And thanks for being really great. Thanks for coming during lunchtime.